Hi, Clarissa Mosley, Calm Mind Psychology. Thanks for coming back and joining me in the third episode of my series on depression. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the physiological and biological contributing factors or causes of depression. And in this, you're going to find out some very interesting things, so hang in there. There might be some things that you don't quite want to hear about, but these are all factors that can help you resolve the puzzle of your depression and step along the path of healing. So let's look in on what can be causing the depression that you experience in your mind and in your mood, in your body. So basic principle is we need to get rid of this idea that the head is somehow separated from the body just because we have this long, thin neck. Or sometimes not long and thin, but we've had this very compartmentalized, separatist way of looking at the body for a long time. We look at the emotions and then the mindset and then the physical, but we are all one organism. We are affected in every single way in each part of every system in our body by whatever happens. It's not that we can disconnect the mind or the brain from the body. The brain is in fact the central control station of the nervous system that runs through every single little bit, right down to your fingertips and your tips of your toes. So the brain is intimately interconnected to every single part of your body, and it's even strongly connected through this thing called the vagus nerve. So if you were to imagine your brain as being like the bush of a tree, and then your throat and chest area as having the trunk of the tree going through it, the roots of this tree would be reaching into every vital organ in your chest cavity, your heart, your lungs, your pancreas, and your gut. And this vagus nerve is how signals go from these organs to the brain and back again, lightning fast, so that the brain can keep an eye on what's happening in the organ systems in the body, particularly the gut, known recently as the second brain, and communicate very quickly. An example would be the last time you ate bad food. How long did it take you to realize that? You might not have realized it while you were eating it, but certainly very soon afterwards, your body was giving you very strong signals to get rid of that food. And this is because the gut would have sent signals through the vagus nerve to the brain telling it, we've got a problem here, and the brain would have gone, that's poison, that's no good, get rid of it, vomit. Right? So the punchline of the story is that what happens in the vagus doesn't stay in the vagus. Boom, boom. Sorry, I couldn't help that. What I really wanted you to know for now is that the brain and the gut are intimately, instantaneously connected. That means that whatever you put in your mouth goes to your gut and informs your brain. The other thing I may as well tell you right here and now, which is hopefully not news to you, your brain uses the nutrients in the food that you eat to make its neurotransmitters and all of the other chemicals and components that are present in your brain and body. So what this means is that hopefully you are consuming enough nutrients in the form of vitamins and minerals and protein, which are the basic building blocks for the body. The brain needs certain vitamins and minerals, which are unfortunately deficient in most diets because they're deficient in the soil. And zinc alone performs over 200 enzymatic functions in the body. It's like a cofactor for so many things. You get the point. You need to be eating a good diet in order to supply your brain with what it needs. And we will talk more about this in a later video. Right now we're focused on the problems that can be occurring in your body or in your lifestyle, which could be affecting your depression. So while we're talking about the gut, I'm going to introduce the subject of a leaky gut. You may have heard of this or you may have poo-pooed it, but poo-poo being a deliberate pun. Honestly, if you want to see what state your gut is in, have a look at your poo. You know, if you want to know what's going on in your body and your digestion isn't working well, you may poo-poo really badly. In fact, some of the clients that I've had that have had very bad moods, mood disorders, depressions, anxieties, explosive moods, have had a parallel situation happening in the bathroom. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to delve into this too much. I'm going to explain what I've found through research. I'm very interested in this topic of integrative medicine and the gut-brain connection and how certain factors within our body can lead to depressive symptoms. So a leaky gut can also implicate a leaky blood-brain barrier. The problem is that what I've expressed is that what happens in the gut doesn't stay there. It can, if we've got a leaky gut, if the gut junctions have been loosened up, whole proteins can go into the blood system. Now, you can take this with a grain of salt because I am not a medical professional. This is something that I've learned through integrative medicine that I've been looking at for a long time. But we do know that lots of people's guts are compromised. The excessive use of antibiotics, excessive stress will erode your gut. Stress causes high cortisol, it causes high noradrenaline, adrenaline in the body, and cortisol is designed to only be there for a while. We are not meant to have high levels all the time. So high cortisol erodes a lot of things in the body, in the gut, and in the brain. We're going to talk a little bit more about cortisol later, but just as an example, you could have food intolerances. Alcohol, unfortunately, doesn't do great things to the gut lining. Anything, food intolerances, illnesses, gastrointestinal infections, ongoing overuse of antibiotics, illnesses, infections, viruses, long periods of stress can all erode the gut lining, causing this problem of leaky gut and also an overgrowth of unwanted bacteria. Now, another thing you probably aren't aware of is that gut bacteria, certain types of it, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the long Latin names of these things, but certain types of gut bacteria help us produce things like dopamine. Now, everyone's heard of dopamine. It's that feel-good neurotransmitter that gives us a kick and a reward. If you don't have this certain gut bacteria in sufficient levels in your natural microbiome, you aren't going to have the raw materials and cofactors and the machinery to make dopamine. So we want to have a really good gut, but if we've had long periods of stress, we are more likely to have a severely compromised gut. If we have been eating a poor diet, feeding all the bad bacteria and not the good bacteria, and guess what the bad bacteria like? Carbs, sugar, alcohol, all the nasty stuff, and the good bacteria like vegetables, a little bit of fruit, you get the picture. So if your diet hasn't been optimum, as it often isn't in depression and in a busier lifestyle and when you've been under periods of stress, you are stressed and busy, you don't eat well, you don't take care of yourself, you're not diving into cooking something from scratch, you're getting whatever you can grab on the fly and eating it. Often stressed, hurried people tend to gobble their food down. I like that word, gobble. They don't chew enough. Digestion starts in the mouth. Oh my God, I feel like I'm your mother now telling you how to eat. But you basically what I'm trying to do is paint the picture of how things can go wrong, right? And how these things go wrong and then they build on each other and things get worse and worse and worse. The things that you may not have considered that could be contributing to your depression is toxicity. Toxicity can come from past viral infections or infections from parasites, from heavy metal toxicity. Things like mercury, lead, and cadmium are all known neurotoxins that can lead to or contribute to depression. And mold. Mold toxicity illness has been identified. We know that black mold can make people very sick in the lungs, but certain kinds of household molds that have overgrown, if you are a certain type of person, and this is the type of person that has got the celiac genes, and this means that you don't create antibodies to mold toxins. About a quarter of the population, not everybody, but about a quarter of the population cannot make antibodies to combat mold spores or toxins in the body, and then the body can react. Normally it will react in a way that's kind of obvious. You'll be coughing or a sore throat or something like that, but not always. The mold toxicity can get through the system and cause a chronic inflammation. Now, we are definitely going to be talking about inflammation soon, but just to know that if you are one of these susceptible type people living in a moldy environment, and you are having this brain fog because you've got a lot of inflammation, that is something worth exploring. So, inflammation. Inflammation. Let me start by posing you a question. I want you to think of the last time that you were sick or had the flu. How did you feel? Well, if you're anything like me, you felt very tired. You felt very lethargic even when you were feeling better. You felt very like you wanted to go away into your bed and stay there. You didn't really feel like hanging around other people and socializing, did you? You certainly couldn't do what you would normally do in a day. And, maybe you were feeling a little bit self-centered and who's going to look after me and why hasn't anyone bought me any tea or toast or called me? Oh, and you wouldn't have been able to think straight, would you? You are even reading a book, you think, I'm sick, I'm going to read that book. And it's like, no, I can't focus on the reading. You are pretty, compromised in your liveliness. These symptoms are symptoms of your body fighting the infection. And the way your body fights the infection is through the immune system putting out a defense mechanism that is inflammation. Right? When you are sick, you are inflamed. And the inflammation causes these symptoms of brain fog, of lethargy, of not being able to think straight, of being unable to concentrate, of not wanting to go out and socialize with people. These are very similar symptoms to depression. A depressed person has brain fog very often, doesn't want to socialize, wants to withdraw, be alone, not do a lot, can't think straight, isn't motivated. Interesting correlation, isn't it? What we have found is a high correlation of inflammatory conditions in people with depression. And it's not just the inflammation that's causing the symptoms of depression. It's what the inflammation is doing in the brain that's problematic. So the question would be, what's causing the inflammation, right? So when you're sick, you know why you're inflamed. Your body's fighting a virus or an infection. But when you're depressed and inflamed, what's the problem in the body that the inflammation is addressing? Well, that can be one of several things. I mentioned cortisol before. So cortisol is often found in elevated levels in people with depression. Cortisol is the stress hormone, but cortisol is also catabolic. It eats stuff up. It's erosive. And so this is why long periods of stress can wear down your gut just as much as eating badly for ages can. So prolonged stress is inflammatory. Lots of people who present with depression will give an absolute shopping list of the stuff that they have been through recently. And it might be bad stuff. It could be I found out my husband was cheating and then he left me and I've got no money and I don't know where I'm going and I feel so betrayed, but I've got to look after the kids and also find somewhere to live, and I can't believe, they've gone through this kind of trauma in their life. Or it can be just this long list of, well, I finished my degree and then I went to get this job, but while I was doing this job, it was just an internship, so I had to work a night shift somewhere. And when I was doing the night shift, my mother got ill, and so I had to be driving her in and out of the hospital, and I was so worried about what might happen to her, but I had to show up at this job and then at my internship at the same time. And meanwhile, I was applying for an apartment, and you just look at their backstory and you're going, gosh, you've been through a lot. And so this being through a lot is the stress, the sort of long-term stress that can lead to this erosion in the system, an erosion in the gut, an erosion in the nervous system, and eventually the inflammation, because the stress hormones that are put out when you are stressed are inflammatory. We're only meant to get stress for short periods of time. Stress isn't a bad thing. Stress motivates us to move. It's designed to keep us alive and surviving. But we are only meant to get into fight and flight for moments, escape danger, and then go back into rest and digest, go back into calm down mode. But many people are stuck in fight or flight. They've got to do this, they've got deadlines, they've got people to meet, they've got things, they've got expectations, they've got roles, they've got children, they've got partners that aren't happy with them, they've got jobs, they've got bully bosses. There's all of these things, sources of stress. So the stress can be constant, and it is very erosive on the system. So we can basically stack up. I want you to sort of start looking at what stack you can make that could be things that can pile on top of each other, that can lead to eventually an inflammatory state. And the inflammatory state is going to be also inflammation in your brain. So I mentioned in the beginning of this video how we are all one interconnected system. We can't divide anywhere off. If our body is inflamed, our brain is inflamed. If our brain is inflamed, our body is systemic inflammation. It goes right through the system. You may not be able to see it. It's not like you've got puffy hands or something, although many people do. Some people, you can tell they're not digesting properly because their belly bloats up. But for many people, the inflammation is unseen, and it's happening at a very subtle level inside the body. When it's happening inside the brain, what is being activated in the brain is these little immune cells that are very prolific, especially in the frontal cortex, little immune cells called microglial cells. Now, the microglial cells are there in a little inactive state, just little antenna up, keeping an eye out for invaders or infections or things that shouldn't be there. So when we talk about having that toxic food or the heavy metal toxins, it would be the microglia that will go, oh, there's some toxins, we need to deal with that. Other forms of inflammation that I haven't mentioned yet that it's really relevant to know about are things like head trauma. So we've talked about emotional trauma that can definitely cause inflammation, but head trauma. A lot of people forget when they've had some relevant head trauma. They might have had a car accident or fallen off a bike or fallen off something or banged their head into something really hard or had a blow, but it's something that a lot of people forget. Or in sports games, in contact sports, there's a lot of head trauma that happens there, and it's just par of the course. So it's not noted unless there is a passing out or a concussion. So anything that's got to the level of concussion has sadly damaged your brain. Now, damage in the actual brain is going to cause this inflammatory healing or trying to deal with the damaged brain cells or the damage response from the microglia. And the other thing that can also cause subtle brain damage, and this is the hidden thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, is hypoxia, also known as slight deprivation of oxygen to the brain, also known as sleep apnea. About 2/3 of the people who have sleep apnea don't know they have it. Sometimes a partner will alert someone to the fact that they are snoring, and then there's these long periods of no sound. But not everybody snores, and not everyone's apnea is obvious. But these tiny little apneas are happening throughout the night and causing tiny little hypoxias to the brain. And these tiny little hypoxias are registering as brain damage and causing an inflammatory response. I have worked with people who have sleep apnea, and it is really obvious that this apnea feeds into their depression. It may not be the only factor, but it certainly really makes them slow and sad and phlegmatic and fuzzy and unable to think and concentrate properly. And when they've gone on the apnea machines, there's a big difference in their mood. And I can't move past this hypoxia point before I also mention that there is a practice that young people seem to be engaging in, that they get from certain media material that they watch, that involves choking. Some kids do this as a trick, and some people do it as a sexual activity where they are choking someone when they are making love to them. This is dangerous. If you lose any level of oxygen to your brain, you are playing with fire. If you lose any consciousness in that, kids, if you are doing that thing where you get people to hyperventilate and you squash them and make them pass out, it is bad. It is bad for your brain to lose consciousness like that. So please don't. Okay, we can move on now. So to recap, 75% of the frontal lobe is microglia. Microglia are part of the brain's innate immune system. It is on the lookout for toxins and viruses and nasties in the brain. These toxins and nasties can show up in the form of mold toxicity, Lyme disease, heavy metal toxicity, head trauma from hypoxia or from other blows, stress, chronic ongoing stress, high cortisol levels, poor diet so that the gut is leaking and leaking toxins into the brain system, and emotional stress. And we go back to that emotional stress that could be caused from bullying. Social stress is the biggest stress. Stress caused to us by other people. Not just the stress that we cause in our own minds by ruminating and worrying and all that. That is also, but the stress that is created in relationship, as it were, to another person. And we talked last video about bullying, massive source of emotional stress, any form of persecution, abuse, all of those relationship issues that are really stressful. It's all stress, and the stress is seen, creates toxic byproducts, and those toxic byproducts need to be dealt with by the microglia. So the problem is, once these microglia are activated, they have this sort of vicious circle whereby, because they are consuming dead brain cells or toxins, in the act of that, they are giving off toxins. And so those toxins are creating more toxicity. And so there's this vicious sort of feedback that can happen where inflammation can beget more inflammation. And then more inflammation is more. And now, hopefully this is a slow burn, but what can happen? Like, say you've got this, somebody's playing football and they have, quite a big head clash. They're knocked out, they're concussed, and that's all forgotten about. They're 21. It's not a big deal. They move on into their lives and have big parties. They go out binge drinking alcohol. That will strip your gut, because it's a huge influx of alcohol, which is essentially a toxin in the body. It's not a nutrient that the liver's got to deal with. And so then this guy goes to college, which is stressful. He's trying to do his study and manage a relationship with someone who's a little bit difficult. And so there's stress involved in that. Then he goes home and discovers that someone really close to him has got really ill, or maybe even worse, passed away. So that's another huge emotional stress, right? So all of these things culminate. And alongside this, he's got a shitty diet, okay? So all of these things build on each other So we can't just say there's one thing, it was the head trauma when he was 21. It's like that head trauma started a slight inflammatory process, and then the poor diet and the drinking and the relationship stress and the losses all built upon them to create this chap, imaginary chap at say 25, falling into a deep depression. So if you were to look at the history, you might be able to trace this back and unravel this. But it's the unraveling of the inflammation that is a difficult part. So we're going to be talking about that in one of the next videos when we're looking at the physiological risk factors and what can be done to help the depression through these factors. The final thing I need to share with you is in the process of this microglia being overactivated and this inflammation occurring in the brain and the body, and let's also just point out that when you've got inflammation in the brain and the body, the inflammation can be also a source of chronic pain. And chronic pain is a large complaint for people that are depressed. They often think they're depressed because of the chronic pain, but there's a question mark here now. Is the chronic pain a result of the inflammation and that's causing the depression? And you've got this feedback loop happening where you can't really understand which one came first. It can become very chicken and egg. But it's worth examining these factors when you're looking at depression, is that it is not just in the mind. It can be throughout the body, saturating the brain, and things aren't working properly. So viruses can also lead to this inflammation with the microglia cells. And I've seen a lot of people with this post-COVID fog. I think this has got something to do with it. There's this ongoing inflammation occurring. So I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been an awful lot of information. And in the following videos, we're going to look at cures or ways that we can remediate these contributing factors towards depression. If we can look at depression from this multi-layered approach, we've got a better chance of putting together the jigsaw pieces of what may be the contributing factors, because they are different for every person. So if you've liked this video, please hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I suggest you go ahead and do that right now. So in the next section, we'll look directly at ways that you can help facilitate the healing on the physiological, biological level, and maybe start to mitigate some of these contributing factors that are involved in depression. So please follow me through to the next video, and I'll see you there.